Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
Welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentleman History Month. I am Sid Part 2. Joining me today is
Steve Baxley.
Indeed, and we are continuing our History Month discussions on Geeky Gentleman, the month in which we talk about the contributions Geeky Gentlemen have made to history, but that have been ignored by biased educational system, except not at all. And Steve has chosen our final discussion topic for this year's installment of History Month. What are we discussing, Steve?
Today, we're talking about something that's kind of thematically relevant to all of the other stuff we've talked about lately, about like the responsibility of portraying things historically accurately and biopics and all of that stuff. We're talking about war films, and that's kind of broad, but to kind of narrow it down more, I just sort of mean with biopics and movies about specific events or specific people, you kind of have a loose narrative that you know can be corroborated, that you then represent on screen, and you take certain artistic liberties to make it function as a story. War movies are usually true in the sense that, yeah, the thing happened, but nothing inside of them ever has to be true, really, at all. With like very rare exception, like Hacksaw Ridge or Dunkirk, where it is like over the course of a specific event. But in general, they can just kind of be anything. Like you can't really have any sort of way of finding a historically accurate way to portray Midway, because it's just a bunch of random people doing random things that you can never get a straight story for. So you have to kind of hearken more to the spirit of what the event was. And I thought that'd be interesting to talk about. I don't know if we've ever done a review on traditional war movies or really talked about war movies. I don't know if you have any opinions about war movies as a genre, but I thought that'd be fun to talk about.
Yeah, war movies are interesting because I feel like what a war movie has changed very drastically over the course of filmmaking history, because not that they didn't have elements of tragedy in them in the past, in like the early ones, but there definitely seems to have been a shift, maybe coinciding with like Vietnam era war films, like specifically films that were coming out like concurrent with the war. There seems to have been a shift from like kind of glorifying and like painting a very rosy, heroic picture of war, even like, you know, good wars like World War II, to kind of showing a much more like harsh, gritty, this is awful, and trying to more fully depict the tragedy of war on film.
Yeah, I mean, the tragic elements are certainly there. I think part of the shift, too, is the more we get away from the quote-unquote justified wars of stuff like World War II, the more we have, like, actual footage of what goes on in combat zones. Like, Vietnam was a big historical moment, in part because you could turn on the news in the evening and see what was actually happening. And the ability to have that pictured focus of this is the violence, this is the soldiers on the ground, this is everything you weren't shown on film before, all of that kind of skews how you'd be able to present it on film anyway. And so you get kind of contrasting approaches of people that want to play up that grittiness retroactively and people that want to kind of go the opposite direction and almost turn it into satire like MASH. So you have like on one end, all of the gritty Vietnam War pictures like Platoon eventually evolve into like gritty World War II pictures like Saving Private Ryan and Dunkirk or Hacksaw Ridge, or really just any number of modern World War II movies. But then you also have movies like MASH, or I'm blanking on the name of the Stanley Kubrick one. You know the one I'm fucking talking about.
Full Metal Jacket?
Yeah, it's that one. The ones that instead of aligning more to that gritty, realistic vibe, they kind of take the grittiness as an excuse to kind of lampoon this institution that we're just all kind of used to doing, as if war is a natural common thing. And I think that's really interesting. And of course, you have like good ways of doing it and bad ways of doing it. MASH is, I think, just an unwatchable, awful movie. But Full Metal Jacket isn't. Full Metal Jacket is legitimately really good. Saving Private Ryan, I think, is not a particularly good movie, but Platoon is. So like it just kind of varies on how well you execute it. But I think that shift is interesting, and the sort of Vietnamizing of World War II movies in particular seems like its own little subgenre. Because you used to have like all of these like propagandist World War II movies about like fighter pilots and fighting the Nazis and how heroic the Allies were and yada 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 yada. That's kind of now shifted to even World War II was hell, and everyone hated it, and we were in the trenches, even though there were not really trenches, like that.
Yeah, no, that's definitely something I've noticed an uptick on, because, or not, I guess not noticed, 'cause, like I've been watching it in real time. It's just something that kind of seems historically kind of proven out, because you watch like World War II movies that were coming out with the war. There's like some John Wayne movies about Midway and stuff, and like they'll certainly have tragic elements. They'll certainly have characters die and stuff, but like the tone and the like portrayal, I guess, of just the situation and the style of fighting is just shown to be so like heroic and brave and like noble, I think is the proper word. And then even stuff that like depicted World War One prior to I guess the change that Vietnam era films made to war films, still like showed some level of like an honor and like a bittersweet thing, because I think no one was a fan of World War One. Like I don't think anyone ever tried to make World War One look good, but I've seen films about World War One before the 1960s, let's call it, and they don't quite have that same like sting. I feel that a lot of like late 60s, early 70s film had about Vietnam as it is, or as it was happening in the moment. It is interesting. Do you think it's fair to say it is just like we started making Vietnam films, and then the idea of a romantic idea of a war film just kind of went out the window? Can you make a romanticized war film at this point?
I think you can. I think we still kind of do. I think there are still movies that come out ever so often that are propagandistic without like any reason for being that way. Like 13 Hours, Secret Soldiers of Benghazi is very much, I think, like a propagandistic kind of glory and pro-military jingoistic kind of movie. It is very much a movie that harkens back to old war movies where the tragedy isn't that war is bad. The tragedy is in letting the people fighting the war down, because regardless of what they're doing, they are right. And even the good old-fashioned war movies that I really like kind of shift the focus away from whether or not the war was right or wrong to, now that it's over or before it's being fought, the people who are doing the fighting are noble and good and morally unimpeachable, and it's the rest of the world that is the problem. There's a movie from 1946 that I really like called The Best Years of Our Lives, which is, it's an old school epic, and it's a war movie, but it's all set basically after these three guys get out of the war, and it's World War II, obviously. And there's the one guy who's a little bit older that comes back to his wife and kids and realize that they have essentially emotionally moved on from him being around because he was gone all this time. You have a young guy who comes back to his girlfriend, who is just kind of in it for the attractiveness that comes with being in love with a war hero and doesn't really care about him. And then you've got a guy who comes back and has lost his hands. And so he has to like start functioning with a handicap. And they got an actor who actually did lose his arms in World War I or World War II to play that part, which is really cool. And that movie is incredible. It's a really, really good study of just PTSD before we had a word for PTSD in the popular lexicon. But that movie never goes out of its way to say the three main characters that came back from the war are in any way bad people, or in any way failing morally, or in any way responsible for the relationships they have with the people that are kind of effectively abandoning them. It's more interested in casting judgment on everyone outside of their circle and talking about, like, this is what we do to veterans that have lost their arms. This is what we do to people who come back expecting to find their family but don't have it anymore. It's kind of judgy in that way, and we do that still. We still kind of have that with war movies that are more patriotic from the perspective of the soldiers and less critical of the war itself, regardless of what's happening. But the Vietnamizing is really interesting because the Vietnamizing, I feel like, starts to happen with wars that don't really need it. Like, there's definitely a lot of conflicting and complicated politics to World War II, but I really don't understand the desire to, like, make World War II seem morally complicated, you know? Like, it's not Vietnam.
I mean, it's, like, it is kind of ridiculous that World War II may be one of, like, 3 wars in history where there's clearly a bad guy.
Yeah, no, exactly.
It's kind of hard to... You can go to, like, literally any other war in history and you're like, maybe this is a little more complicated. You know, maybe there's like, heroes on both sides kind of thing. But, like, World War II, it's just one side...
No, there was a bad guy.
Yeah, one side has skulls on their uniforms and, like, unbeknownst, admittedly, at the time is literally, like, committing genocides and like structured, efficient genocides, and is just, you know, like, ostracizing a group of people, like
systematically murdering 3 million people, you know? There's a word for that.
It's just like, it's so hard to create any argument for maybe the Nazis were a little more complex than people give them credit. No, they really were. They were the bad guys. They are just the bad guys. Like every other... I'm trying to think of another war where there's just more of, like, a clear cut... Or not even more, but just, like, a comparable level of a clear cut. No, they're just the bad guys. Like even your fucking, like, invasion of Afghanistan and war in Iraq and stuff, right? Like, you know... completely unjustified and kind of ridiculous acts when you look back on it. But with Afghanistan, it's like, well, America, for better or worse, was attacked first from that country. It wasn't the country that did it, but still. And then for fucking Iraq, it's like, yeah, but Saddam Hussein was not a good fucking guy. Like, there's at least an argument to be made for those, right? Like, it's not saying that it's a good thing that it happened, but, like, you could make an argument that it's not the worst thing that could have happened. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else in history that's like, no, like, clearly one side was the bad guy here.
Yeah, and I mean, if there is, it's probably gotten to the point where it's not a particularly interesting story, because I think part of the allure of World War II as a topic for war movies and a topic of trying to Vietnamize it and make it more complicated is because we spent 20 years from the 1940s into the 1960s talking about the valor of World War II. That there was an entire generation of people that kind of coasted on the glory of being involved in World War II, and then following American politics, effectively decided to just ruin the rest of the country for the rest of history. And so there was maybe an incentive to be like, okay, let's go back a little bit and say, greatest generation, what the fuck does that actually mean? But you're not doing the thing we were doing in Vietnam, which was the conflict itself is the problem, which is I don't think a thing you really need to do with World War II the way you need to do with Vietnam, because Vietnam, even as it was happening, was a largely unpopular war. It was filled with conflicting information. Really, no one wanted to fucking be there, as opposed to World War II, where there were definitely people that didn't want to be there. There were definitely a lot of shitty things that the Allies did in World War II. I mean, particularly the atomic bomb. But there is a degree of like, there was a degree of 1940s patriotism post Pearl Harbor that people just kind of can't deny existed, and people went out of their way to quote unquote fight for their country there, where making that the problem just feels kind of significantly less interesting. Saving Private Ryan and Fury are two really interesting movies in that respect, because both of them are World War II movies. Both of them are slower paced, traveling across a ruined European landscape, and both of them are trying to paint a really gritty picture of what a World War II soldier's life actually was like. And they have their merits, but I think the problem with both of them at the end of the day is they're focusing really hard on a picture of a soldier that didn't really exist in World War II, and they're kind of transplanting the characterization of a soldier we see in Vietnam movies, like Platoon or like Born on the 4th of July, or the kinds of people that signed up for one thing and got something else, which World War II was not exactly that kind of conflict, especially by the point where you were rolling tanks across a ruined European landscape. Like, that was a very different vibe than burning down forests in Vietnam. But the narrative language is still kind of the same. And I don't really understand why anyone ever really feels the need to do that, aside from World War II is glamorous and Vietnam pictures are Oscar baits.
Well, I think the argument I'd make for why you get your Saving Private Ryan and like its ilk is because of how glamorized World War II specifically was, to the point where some of the horror and the torment that people went through is just not like fully understood. Because I talked about this in an earlier episode this week, but like Spielberg, when he was making that, went to the U.S. military because they have sat on footage of D-Day, of the landing at Normandy, for decades, and they've not released this to the public because it has been described as too graphic for the public to see. But he got basically special permission as a filmmaker to view the uncut, unedited footage. And one thing that's talked about with Saving Private Ryan is how like graphic, and it's one of the most violent and like disgusting in some cases pictures of war that we've ever seen on film. And Spielberg's talked about it and is like, yeah, I only showed like maybe a third of the most violent and like gruesome stuff I saw in that footage. And I feel like that's kind of not on the whole, but I think that is a part, an element of what Spielberg as a filmmaker was trying to capture in that film is we have a very particular, like almost mythic view of World War II as like these heroes, like shining knights storming the gates, and it wasn't that. It was incredibly brutal. Like World War I and World War II have an interesting distinction in that they are the beginnings of new world production and old world tactics meeting. It's more this way in World War I, where they just straight up do not understand the fact that like the old ways of fighting wars does not work with modern equipment. And that's why you get like World War I generals doing the same plan over and over and over again. It's just, we just need more bravery. And they definitely learned their lesson from that by the time you get to World War II. But there's still, it's still there a little bit. Like, one of my favorite things is in the beginning of the war, when the U-boats would, like, sink an English ship, they'd, like, let the survivors live, and they'd even be so kind as to radio British Navy to let them know where they just sank their ship at so they can come pick up their guys. By the end of the war, you did not have that shit. Like, that kind of gives you an idea of just how much changed and how, like, brutal and total that war became. World War World War II is some of the first times you have civilian targeting as just a tactic in quite some time. It's not that, like, that wasn't a thing before World War II, but that had kind of, fallen out of favor for a long time, and World War II kind of brought it back, which is kind of insane.
Yeah, I mean, World War II is also famous both in the lead-up and in the actual war for countries breaking their promises to a degree that we had not seen before. Like, Hitler in particular, obviously, going back on his word in several cases, the way he treated prisoners of war, the way the Soviets treated prisoners of war from Germany. Like, there was a lot of, like, these are the adults in the room who are deciding for now to not behave like the adults in the room, which made it kind of savage on a certain level. And it's not like none of that didn't happen, but it's interesting that we kind of go back and we paint a picture of World War II as grittier and darker, which it was in real life, but we still kind of focus on a more Vietnam style of being in Europe in World War II was bad, as opposed to the things around and facilitating the war were the bad things. What's the movie called? I keep blanking on this at every movie this guy's ever made. Dr. Strangelove. Dr. Strangelove is a really great satire because it's a satire of how governments make choices. And the way it lampoons world leaders and the fail-safes for nuclear war and stuff, that hits so hard because that's the thing that's underpinning all of the dark, gritty Vietnam and World War II movies, that it is legitimately, at the end of the day, this gaggle of assholes who don't know what they're talking about, making up the rules, leading to disastrous consequences, and that's why it's scary, but that's also kind of why it's funny at the same time. And that direction is not something you really see in World War II movies. Because, Spielberg can talk about how the opening 25 minutes of Saving Private Ryan are the most accurate depiction of D-Day we're ever going to get, which they probably are. There's no reason to dispute that. But there's also reason to say so much of that movie is about traversing through Europe, finding this guy, the valor of soldiers specifically, and the horror of war in general. And by the end, it's not really saying a whole lot about World War II as much as it's just saying, like, these guys had it rough. Which is just such a weird thing to want to do for World War II, because that's not really the interesting part of that war.
Yeah. No, I mean, I guess to see where you're coming from. I don't know. I find it, like, more... I think there's a little more to it than that, but that might just be the fact that I haven't seen that movie in a long time. I don't know. Let's transition off of World War II a little bit. Let's talk about movies about other wars. In particular, I want to talk about, I think, my favorite war movie of all time, based on the most famous war.
Oh, God.
Troy.
Oh, okay, all right.
I fucking love that movie so much, man. Like that movie has aged like fine wine for me, because, like, I watched it in, like, middle school, high school, when it was like, before this day is done, I will look down upon your corpse and smile. Like, it's really cool. So, like, that's where I was, like, with it. And to a degree, I still am with it initially. But, like, the fact that I got to have the experience of watching that film for years and having only watched the theatrical release, but then in adulthood watching it and not knowing that I was watching a director's cut.
Yeah.
Just kind of fucking changed my life because the director's cut of that movie is so much more like brutal. In not like a oh it's so fucking cool, but in like a oh fuck man kind of way. Like the thing the director's cut has that I don't think is in the theatrical is when they get into Troy and they start storming the city. You just see this scene of like them like doing a ancient raid of a city, and like the soldiers like run into a house and just rip a baby out of its mother's arms and like throw its head against a wall. It's like holy fucking shit. That movie does such a good job of like marrying kind of the like adolescent like army commercial, join the few, the proud, the Marines, kind of like isn't that neat, isn't that cool, wouldn't that be badass, like feelings with the no but this is actually terrible. It's so fucking perfect. I don't know how you do that. I have no idea how they fucking managed it, but I swear to God, that's exactly what that movie is. It is 110% the like cool propagandized version of military like aesthetic, I guess, married with the like harsh reality of okay, this is what you're sold, but this is what you're getting. This is the actual thing that's going on. And there's like so many good fucking lines in that movie too. It's like, war is young men dying and old men talking. And I'm like, oh, that fucking guy.
That's a really good fucking line, yeah.
I know! That movie is absolute fucking banger. Absolute
Troy absolutely rules. It is a really good movie. And I mean, historical epics as war movies are just, as their own genre, absolutely fantastic. I love them. I didn't used to be a fan of epics, but I have grown to very much respect them.
I mean, you were the one that made us review Spartacus, so you're definitely...
Which fucking ruled, didn't it?
It was pretty fucking good. Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes those fucking hit. What's another non-World War II war movie you like?
So non-World War II makes it hard because so many good ones are World War II. Enough, but my favorite non-World War II is one I think you like too, Glory.
Glory.
The Civil War movie about the All-Black Regiment.
Oh my god, I haven't watched that in a long, long time.
That's so good though. It's a really good fucking movie. It's basically what Last Samurai rips off.
Yeah, no, you're definitely right.
I love Glory. Glory's got Denzel Washington, Matthew Broderick, Carrie Elways. It's a banger cast. I don't know the director off the top of my head. I could probably Google it, but I won't. But it came out in the 90s, I want to say. It's a Civil War movie about the 54th Regiment in the Civil War, which was an all-black regiment of troops that were both kind of conscripted into the war and some that volunteered to fight for their freedom, literally in a way that other wars about freedom generally aren't. And it's basically about Matthew Broderick taking on this job and training them up to be soldiers, but also learning to be sympathetic for the cause because he's a Union soldier first and he cares about the politics later. And he kind of gets thrown in a situation where he meets people that are on the ground that actually have to understand this. And part of making it a Civil War movie that makes it so interesting is that the Civil War, really everything post a modern era, there used to be a very clear divide between officers and infantrymen. That the officers sat and talked and were behind closed doors, and the infantry is what fought. There were rules of engagement, things were very linear and worked almost like a board game, like a game of Risk. And Glory does a really good job of bridging that sort of modern war style of this is a guy who's expected to be sitting in the boardrooms and talking to the officers that is actually on the ground. And it translates that conflict into something that has a much more material reality to it. but it's a really good movie. It's definitely one of my favorite war movies. I'm not a big war movie person in general either, but it's really good. It's really, really intense. It's extremely educational. And as far as I know, I'm sure someone can correct me if they need to, but as far as I know, it is reasonably historically accurate as far as you can be.
Yeah, I think the scene that I remember most from that was about like the implicit awkwardness, I guess is the best word, of disciplining one of his soldiers that was played by Denzel Washington, if I remember correctly, who was like acting out and like causing trouble, and he had to like the way you dealt with it then is you order lashes, but like there was a weird awkwardness of like, here's this guy who signed up to fight for his freedom so he doesn't have to be a slave and get like whipped on command for not following ridiculous orders, and here I am as a military officer ordering him to do something that he finds ridiculous, and my punishment for him is to whip him. And it's like this like really interesting scene where like everyone's involved in it is like very aware of the strangeness of the situation, for various reasons and to different degrees. That scene like always kind of stuck with me.
It's a really, really good moment. And the way that movie progresses is you basically have this guy that is put in command of the situation he doesn't really want, and progressively through the movie kind of gets his wish, which is he doesn't actually have to go out and fight, but becomes sympathetic to the actual cause of World War II to the point where he does actually want the soldiers to have their chance to die for something that they do actually believe in. It's a good tearjerker of a movie. I really enjoy it. I have not watched it in a couple of years, but it's one that I do go back to kind of regularly.
Mm-hmm. All right, so here's an interesting question. What is a war movie? Again, we'll try to avoid World War II if we can. What is a war movie that does is just an absolute failure of a war movie? Like, this is not good, and this was like you were trying to do something and you failed miserably.
I mean, there's so many. There are as many bad war movies as there are good war movies. American Sniper is one that really comes to mind. I don't know if you count that as a war movie per se, but it takes place during a war and it follows a soldier who's on leave from the war and is about his PTSD. American Sniper, I don't know if anyone's like familiar with the movie at this point because they've moved so far along emotionally from that movie in 2014. But it's directed by Clint Eastwood, which already kind of gives you a window into the sympathetic leanings Eastwood's camera has. And it stars, what the fuck's his name? Bradley Cooper as a Marine sniper named Chris Kyle. And if you know anything about the real Chris Kyle, man was a fucking psychopath. Man was legitimately insane, racist, going out of his way to kill as many people as possible. Like, certifiably insane man. But it's a movie about him, and it's a movie about how he became the deadliest American sniper in the Iraq War, and how he killed like 100-something people. And there's all of these moments in the movie that are about his PTSD from being in the war. But the quintessential problem with the movie is, I'm not saying that there isn't something to sympathizing with a clearly mentally unstable person conscripted into war who is basically roped into a dangerous ideology to kind of ease whatever anxiety he has, which is largely what the movie's about. All that's kind of fine and good. The problem with that movie at its heart is he doesn't have PTSD over being told to fight in the Iraq War and being scared of IEDs and shit. He has PTSD because he's just really fucking racist and brown people scare him. Like, that's kind of what the movie kind of amounts to by the end, is that like he has this weird man-child level of abandonment issues that he exercises by just going around fucking killing people, and the movie makes it seem a lot more sympathetic. The clip that they played from the movie when it got to Bradley Cooper's Oscar nom. That sort of like gold moment for him is the scene where his kid is born, and he's watching through the window with his kid and all the other kids in the nursery, and his baby, having obviously just been born, is crying, and he starts to lose his mind. He starts to clearly go into like a PTSD manic episode, where he's starting to yell at the nurse banging through the window to attend to his kid because he's crying. And you can tell he's having like a legitimate reaction. But the way that scene plays is he sounds extremely demeaning and hostile. And there's nothing about the image of his kid crying that like visually connects to what he was dealing with in the Iraq War, unless you're trying to say that he too is a baby just crying for no reason. It's not a good movie. It's not about a good person. And everything it wants to say about like helping veterans come back and ease them back into normal society after everything we put them through in war gets completely lost when the main character is legitimately a psychopath that should be analyzed.
Interesting. Okay. So I had to think of mine, because I have my right answer, but I said it would be non-World War II. So we'll go back and talk about my World War II answer. But I had to think of my other one, and in doing just basic Wikipedia research, I found some funny shit out about it. Okay, so my pick is The Patriot from the year 2000, starring Mel Gibson. Which is clearly what happened here is Braveheart came out and was very successful, and so they were like, well, let's get Mel Gibson back, but we'll make an American one that'll be even more successful. And like, there's so much going against this film. First of all, it's directed by Roland Emmerich, so that's not good. And I've seen this movie, and it's got, I fucking did not realize Heath Ledger was in it too. But it's got like a lot of really just shitty things that I don't like when war movies do this, which is like put war crimes in the like opposing side that never fucking happened. So The Patriot's got like this really infamous scene where the like English general or commander or whatever locks a bunch of people from a town in a church and then sets it on fire after the town surrendered to him. That never fucking happened. And like, that's just when you're doing a war movie, like if you do that and it's all completely fictional, it's based on like a fake war or whatever, it's fine. It's a villainous scene, right? But there's something that changes contextually when you do something like that with a war that actually happened. You know? There's like when you create a war crime for the other side to do that did not happen, it feels wrong and takes away from what you're doing in the film and begins to feel just like, I don't know, like morally reprehensible to me. Because fucking Pearl Harbor does this too, where like they have the Japanese pilots start like shooting at the hospital. They're like, no, that didn't happen. And that's like, you know, Pearl Harbor was bad enough on its own. You didn't need to add to it. Like, there's, you know, shit like that kind of drives me crazy. So The Patriot's got a lot of that shit going on, and Mel Gibson's just awful in it, right? So there's, and again, it's fucking Emmerich, right? It's the guy that makes disaster films is gonna take on the Revolutionary War. There's got bad written all over it. So I wanted to try to figure out who wrote it. Because I was like, oh, is this the same guy that like did Braveheart? Did they get him on to do this? And no. Funny enough, it's the guy that also wrote Saving Private Ryan.
What?
Right? Which is like shocking. Because I think that is a much better movie, just like factually. But
well, yeah.
So that's pretty funny. But then also in his filmography, like oddly in his filmography, it kind of sticks out like a sore thumb. I'm gonna read through it. He's not written a lot of films. The Comrades of Summer, television movie from '92. Never
even heard of it.
Tall Tale from 1995.
Never heard of it.
Fly Away Home, 1996.
Never heard of it.
Saving Private Ryan, 1998.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, you've heard of Saving The Patriot from the year 2000, which, side note, I'm so shocked this movie came out pre 9/11. But The Patriot from the year 2000, okay? Long gap. Part of me wonders if he retired for a little bit there. In 2013, Steve, you want to take a guess on the movie that came out in 2013?
2013. I don't fucking know. What came out in 2013? The Prisoners, Man of Steel, Iron Man 3. I don't know. What?
Thor: The Dark World.
You know what? I am more surprised that.
I don't know. That is such a fucking
What the fuck?
That is such a distinction that just sticks out like a sore thumb in this dude's filmography that just cracks me the fuck up.
What was he doing for the 13-year gap? Because it wasn't practice. What the hell?
That one just kills me, man. I'm sorry. I know that we're talking about war, and Thor: The Dark World is not a war movie, but like, Jesus fucking Christ, this is the funniest shit I've found all
Look,
day.
Thor: The Dark World may not be a war movie, but I can say I've been to war because I saw it in theater.
Thor: The Dark World may not have been a war movie, but it was the first strike.
Oh my god, Mel Gibson in the MCU.
Oh, that'd be pretty. Who would you cast as? Who would you cast Mel Gibson as in the MCU?
Honestly, back in the day, he probably wouldn't have been Wolverine, because he does kind of have the short, stocky thing going for him. But modern day MCU, I feel like you need to play into the big cocky personality. So I don't know, maybe someone like the Sentry, someone that thinks he's a lot cooler than he actually is.
Okay, all right. I don't know. That's a good question. Fucking, trying to think of a good one. That's kind of hard, especially with my limited Marvel knowledge. What's the name of Black Panther? No, we've already got that guy. That guy's already been cast. Fuck. He's played by Martin Short, Black Panther's white guy character. Damn it. I don't know.
Boss?
Yeah, I was gonna go for him, but no, we've already got that guy.
I'm sure there's a Spider-Man villain somewhere that Sony has asked Mel Gibson for.
Yeah, no, I can see it. Racist Spider-Man. That's it. Like, you remember that? Oh, I hope I'm not racist Spider-Man. That one. That's what I want Mel Gibson to play.
He'll be the voice Spider-Man. Of spiders, man.
No, fuck you. That's too good a character for Mel Gibson. Fucking throw some salt over your shoulder or something. You can't do that to me.
I mean, you could also potentially read and make him the
Red Hulk.
Yeah, make him the Hulk. See what happens. Better idea than making it Harrison Ford.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. This is a lovely little tangent. Okay, so we've talked about good war movies that aren't World War II. We've talked about bad war movies that aren't World War II. I want to talk about a really, really bad war movie that is World War II. Came out quite a bit after the fact. And this is I think this is the first movie that truly made me despise cinema. Retroactively thinking about it, this is probably I'd still argue one of, if not the worst movie ever made.
Okay.
And this is the Soviet produced Come and See. So this is a film set in Soviet Russia to show the hardships that the Russian people had to go through facing the Nazi invasion of their land, which on paper is a perfectly noble and totally understandable thing to do, because certainly a Western director wasn't going to fucking do that. But this movie has the distinction of making me watch a movie that is so absolutely miserable, in which the people I am supposed to sympathize with and understand their plight and the horrors they experienced, it fails so miserably at that by the end of this movie, I had the thought, maybe the Nazis are kind of onto something. Like maybe the Russians didn't deserve to exist because just like the fucking movie starts out with these two Soviet boys digging in a beach for like buried guns, and some like old man yells at them that they're not supposed to get the fuck home, don't do that, and then they kind of buy into the Soviet army propaganda and like join up and end up with this regiment in this like little camp in the woods, and then the commander's like, I don't want this kid fighting with us. He's too fucking young, and I'm not gonna send a kid to go die, so we're gonna march off and I'm gonna send him the other direction. And then the kid spends like the majority of the movie basically like wandering around the Russian countryside, keep running into different Russian people who get progressively worse. And by this I mean like actively just say horrible things and treat the kid like shit. And it gets to the point where he gets back to his own village that has now been attacked by Nazis, and the old man that was yelling at him not to dig up the guns on the beach has been like burned alive, but he's still like hanging on to life. And the kid comes to see him, and this old man who's like, melting before your eyes looks at the kid and says, "This happened to me because you dug up the guns on the beach." And I'm like, fuck all of you people. You're all terrible. Like, maybe you fucking deserve to die. I don't fucking know.
I'm surprised this is the one you picked, because I didn't think this is...
Dude, I don't know how you make a World War II movie and fail as miserably at like, we as the Soviet government just feel that Western filmmakers don't have our interests at heart and will not be able to accurately portray the sufferings that the Soviets went through, being the only ones that had to fight off the Nazis for such a long period of time. Perfectly valid. How the fuck you go from that to getting me as a viewer to think, nah, maybe they were onto something, just absolute fucking floored me. How you can't, like, how do you make the people that are being victimized by Nazis not sympathetic? I don't understand that, Steve.
Oh my god. I mean, we started this conversation problematize the war against the Nazis, and here we are.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's the one film that's ever done it, and that's why I consider it just like an absolute failure of a film. Because I had to watch it for a class. I took a class called The Holocaust on Film in college, and we watched a bunch of Holocaust movies, and this was one of the ones we watched. And I said exactly what I said. This is the first time I've ever thought the Nazis maybe were onto something after watching a movie, because this was so fucking bad. And like everyone got like real quiet as me and the professor talked about my thoughts on that, and no one really wanted to say anything. And then like after class, after we were all leaving, the professor kind of like left a little bit earlier than everyone else. We're all like packing up, and like one of the guys just comes up and goes, "Dude, you were so right about that fucking movie." And then like 2 or 3 other people are like, "Yeah, no, for real, like it is a fucking slog to watch it, not in a way that it's like meant to be." And I'm like, why the fuck didn't you join in on that? Disaster. Honestly, of a war movie.
I thought you were gonna bring up Valkyrie for the first World War II movie.
That's pretty bad too, where you take someone who was a devout Nazi that just thought Hitler was doing things wrong and he could do a better job, and try to make him into a hero. That's a bad choice as well.
that was a very... He aged particularly well either.
I mean, I don't think that movie needed to age poorly. I think that movie was pretty fucking bad out the gate and should have been banned like instantly. Like I knew about that being bad. Like, I mean, again, that movie came out when I was in high school, when I was taking a class just about World War II, and the teacher at the time made a note to like actively show the real history of this guy that tried to kill Hitler, and he's like, yeah, so his goal was not to kill Hitler for like some kind of morally justified thing. No, his thing was like, Hitler is running this war very poorly, and end of the day, we don't really have a lot of problems with like the US or the UK. So if I get Hitler out of the way and I take over, I could probably sue for peace with them and then just focus on murdering Russia and the Jews. Like that was this whole thing. And Tom Cruise saw this guy and was like, "That's an admirable motherfucker right there."
To be fair, I have not seen Valkyrie since it came out in like 2000, so I have no idea how it watches now. But I can't imagine it watches well.
I mean, I don't think it watched well at the time because they go out of their way to try to make this dude look like he's trying to do this for like the right reasons. Like I feel like Valkyrie is the thing, kind of the fallacy of the German soldier that didn't really know what was happening.
Yeah.
Behind the lines, it's like that's just. I will believe that the vast majority of the German people did not know about like the camps and particularly the execution camps, not just the like working camps, but the concentration death camps. I will believe that because that was like a surprise to the soldiers when they entered the land, the Allied soldiers. But like the fucking ghettos and the concentration work camps and everything, everyone in Germany was like pretty on board for that. So to try to like portray that guy, that kind of like, oh, I didn't really understand what was going on, as the hero of the film, such a fucking bizarre choice of a film. Like I'll go so far as to say this. If it was not Tom Cruise in that movie, I think everyone would have universally panned it. It's just that Tom Cruise has this weird, like, movie star energy where he can kind of do no wrong.
Well, to be fair, he didn't at the time, because that movie came out around the same time about him being a Scientologist. And so when they were marketing that movie, they, like, deliberately tried not to focus on Tom Cruise.
To an extent, I remember some of the marketing for that, and like it was a very typical like Tom Cruise kind of trailer. As far as my memory serves, where it's just him on camera and him talking a lot. So I don't know, maybe not. But yeah, Valkyrie, not a good one. That'd be a fun one to review, just to shit on for like an hour and a half or whatever. Side note. I do think you could legitimately make a movie just about all the assassination attempts on Hitler, because there's this like belief that like no one tried to stop him, and honestly a lot of people did, and it's kind of like shocking that the dude lived as many times as he did to the point where legitimately my theory is that time travel exists and you are unable to perform paradoxes in time travel because the laws of physics will bend to be like straight up fucking Looney Tunes before they let you commit a paradox. And I base this theory entirely on the fact that so many people tried to kill Hitler so many different ways and none of them worked. To like absurd, like literally the situation in Valkyrie, there was a bomb in the room with him and he got out without a fucking scratch. That is shocking to me. So I mean, there's my time travel theory.
Between Rasputin, Castro, and Hitler, government agencies are really bad at their job.
Yeah, no, you're right. But at the same time, like, I still think time travel exists, and they've all tried to kill Hitler, and they've all failed monumentally. That is my more likely theory, that the government is just that incompetent.
Not a war movie, but we talked about this recently, and I do want to just throw it in here real quick. But the 12th Doctor Christmas special where he regenerates, so fucking good. With that guy about to die in the trench, that episode of Doctor Who does so much more with trying to humanize conflicts and soldiers and the feelings of death in that situation and what it's like to kind of accept that circumstance and what it means to live a good life than I think most things do. It's just really, really fucking good. Also, have you been keeping up? I guess you haven't, but I'll ask anyway, just to be polite. Have you been keeping up with Love Everlasting, the Tom King, Elsa Chartier book?
Nope.
All right, cool. Love Everlasting is a creator-owned book by Tom King and Elsa Chartier. It's being published by Image now, but it's on Substack, so you can read basically the first 6 issues, and the print version's only like to issue 4. But the premise of the book is that it's about the idea of romance comics, and the main character keeps hopping between romances quantum leap style. So she'll be in one story in like the 70s where she's in love with a hippie, and then they'll fall in love at the end, and then she'll wake up and it'll be another story somewhere else. And she's basically just caught in this infinite loop. And the premise of the whole book is exploring romance as a genre in the same vein as Sandman was exploring literary horror in comics. And so there's a lot of ongoing narrative, but there's a lot of one-shots sprinkled between. Issue 4 of the series right now is probably one of the best single issues of any comic this year, and it's a war one-shot where basically the main character, Joan, she's a bar singer at a club in, I think it's World War II. I don't remember specifically what war it is. And she's singing one day, and the soldier and all of his friends are at the bar, and they're drinking, and they're having a good time, and then they're just enjoying her voice. And they strike up a conversation, and he's like, yeah, we're about to ship off, and we're going to go to war, and I'm sure we'll be back by Christmas. That's what everyone's telling us. It actually might have been World War II now that I say that. Or World War I now that I say that. But he gets ready to ship off, and he remembers her voice specifically, and then he comes back, and then there's one less person because they died. And then they talk more, and then he leaves, and then he comes back, and then there's one less person. And progressively, all of his friends just continue to die. And he comes back for her more and more and falls more in love. And the idea behind the issue sort of becomes that when you're faced with the fact that you know you're going to die, you could be fearless, but most people aren't actually. And what they actually are is that they're so terrified that they lack the idea that makes their life worth living. And so the idea that he's in love with this girl that he hears sing is a comforting thought, while he knows he's about to walk off into the trenches and be killed next because all of his friends are dead. It's so fucking good.
Interesting.
It's so good. Legitimate best single issue comics of the year. It's a complete one shot. It does not connect to anything before or after. Just go to Google, go to Substack, read Love Everlasting number 4. You can read it for free on Substack. It's fantastic.
All right, I'll have to check that one out. No, I won't. Never mind. I don't read comics anymore. I'm terrible. I lied to your face, Steve. Take that.
Read my fucking review.
I can't, Steve. I'm not going to read a review for a comic that I haven't read. What do you think I am? A Twitter user? What do you think I am? A Twitter comic stand? Like, Jesus Christ. Give me some fucking respect.
I mean, fair. I'm so sorry to assume that. But no, it is very, very good. And interesting medium for war because, I mean, we talk all the time. The form of comics is really good at capturing disjointedness in time and the kind of sensory overload you'd experience in that kind of situation. And people like Garth Ennis have kind of like made their bread and butter on writing really good war comics. So that's always a fun avenue. It's a separate topic than war movies, but I just wanted to throw that in there.
That's fair. I don't know. I'm not sure what to go on from there, or what else to really say from that one. So, cool.
Yeah, I mean, we can probably cut it if we need to, but yeah, I mean, I just kind of wanted to talk abstractly about war movies and what the fuck the deal with them is, and what the good ones are, and what the bad ones are, apparently.
Yeah, no, you should go watch Troy. Troy is a fucking great movie.
I've seen Troy. I watched it with you.
Yeah, no, but you should watch it again because it's a good movie.
I mean, that's fair. That's fair.
Steve,
I'll pick Troy.
you more than I've actually watched. We've already reviewed it on Geeky Gentleman. But fuck it. We could do it again. I don't mind. You more than anyone else I know rewatches movies and shows. Like, I don't know anyone else who rewatches stuff as much as you. So, do with that information what you will. I
mean, I'm down to rewatch Troy at some point. Probably won't happen immediately, but I definitely can.
Yeah. Next History Month, maybe? I don't know. Or just whenever you feel up to it, I'd watch it again.
It's like 3 hours long is the only issue.
It is,
like
when do I... very long movie.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't have any problem, like, committing 3 hours to watch a good matter of, like, what day this week do I have 3 hours to watch?
Right. You know, it's funny, we talked kind of, like, around a lot of Vietnam movies, but we didn't really talk about any Vietnam movies. I don't know if we need to. I just thought that was interesting.
Vietnam War movies... Okay. World War II movies are generic and overdone, and there's a million of them. But same with Vietnam. We don't talk enough about how every Vietnam is the same fucking movie. Like, all of them. I don't care if you're Apocalypse Now or you're Platoon, it's the same goddamn movie. But I mean, that's maybe my thing for me is just it kind of bleeds together after a certain point. They all sort of feel like the exact same movie. But no, Vietnam's interesting in its own way. Platoon, in particular, is a really interesting exploration of what people went into Vietnam wanting and what they came out realizing about the war. And seeing Charlie Sheen's character in that movie kind of go from this young person that didn't quite understand what the conflict was to seeing like the absolute abyss of inhumanity that we were committing on other people in the midst of it, and coming out older and rougher but not necessarily wiser is really interesting. It's a Roger Stone movie, and it's a good movie. I think he does better later when he makes Born on the 4th of July, which stars Tom Cruise, and is about a vet who goes to war. He's literally born on the 4th of July, is hyper-patriotic, sees what we did, and then spends the rest of his life trying to atone for that. And it's really, really fucking good. I hesitate calling it a Vietnam movie only because the war's not in it for most of the movie, in the way it is with Platoon. But if you want a good anti-war Vietnam movie, that one's good.
It's interesting. I still think... And anytime I think about like Vietnam on film, I think about the line in Forrest Gump's like, "I'm going to Vietnam. It's a whole nother country." Of just the like, yeah, people didn't know what that was at the beginning of the war, and it's absolutely fascinating how much of a trauma Vietnam was. To the point where like you have guys that made just basically careers off of making nothing but Vietnam movies.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah, it's like that was a lot of shit that they had to process. They couldn't just make one movie and be done with it. They're like, no, I got to go deeper, and that's like inherently fascinating. I don't know. I think the interesting thing about Vietnam, just like as a war, and particularly like how it's reflected in media, again with that idea of if World War II is like the Shining Knights and Korea is like the Forgotten War. Then Vietnam is just like this generation of soldiers who were raised by the World War II vets, right? Like, and so they have a very romanticized idea of what they are supposed to be doing over there. Either raised by the veterans themselves or raised by the idea of what the veterans did. And just the absolute glorification of what they did in World War II. And then they get sent over to Vietnam, and it's just fucking hell. And it's nothing like what they've been like raised or taught to believe what war is, and it's just this absolute culture shock of a thing, again to the point where people just had to make multiple films and careers out of telling that story. That's just kind of like shit, man.
Mad Men is... Sorry, go ahead.
Because you'll hear shit about like Korea like, Korea's not even a full 10 years after the end of World War II. So you still have, like, some guys that just never left the army fighting in that one. Whereas Vietnam is where you start to get, like, that 15 to 20 years, depending on where you're in it. Vietnam, of course, lasts a whole 10 years. So it's kind of fucking insane. I don't know.
Yeah, Mad Men is a really good example of sort of cascading effect of the glory or the because you have the older characters who fought in World War II, like Roger, then you have Don who fought in Korea, and then you have characters like Ken who came up under him that end up fighting in Vietnam. And the first season has a really good sort of back and forth between the old soldiers of World War II who used up all the glory, and everyone forgets that the Korean War was even fought by anyone. And so there's a really good episode in the first season where, like, Roger is feeling extremely old and Don is just trying to keep up with him to prove that he can. And it's a good little microcosm of what that relationship between Korea and World War II was. One person very much past their prime trying to believe that they're not, and another person trying to chase the same kind of glory. And then you skip forward into the Vietnam side, and no one talks about it. No one says anything. People go missing. People come back with massive injuries and missing eyes and missing limbs and shit, but no one talks about it because there is no glory in that one. There's nothing to kind of emotionally reconcile. It all just gets pushed really deep down. I thought that was... But Mad Men's a really good show in general, but a particular aspect of how it progressed through Vietnam over the course of its years on television is really, really good.
Interesting. All right. Well, I think that's a pretty good roundup of things. I'm pretty happy with that. If you're happy with that,
I'm happy with everything.
Okay. Wow. Steve's cured all depression. Awesome.
You just need friends to talk to, and everything's fine.
Yeah. No, that's usually how that works. Alrighty. Well, that will do it for this year's installment of History Month. It's always my favorite month of Geeky Gentlemen. I love talking about this stuff and doing all these deep dives and whatnot. So,
would you say,
Steve.
would you say it's the most wonderful time of the year?
Absolutely, because I hate the next month. So we're back to holiday month next month.
Let's go!
And this was my choice at, like, so last year around Christmas, someone made the suggestion of we were gonna watch all the Home Alone movies, and I was like, you know what, fuck it, bet, because there was like a new one out right at last year, so I fucking did it. I watched all the Home Alone movies, and I'm not gonna make us do that because that's like 6 fucking movies.
Only like 2 of them are worth watching.
But I could, Steve. I have that power.
I mean, I'll just quit.
To watch them. No, you don't. You can't. You are legally obligated to do Geeky Gentlemen every month for the rest of your life. Every week for the rest of your life.
A lot like the toys in Toy Story. If you.
But yeah, so instead of reviewing every Home Alone movie, I want to review one of them, but probably not the one you're thinking of.
God damn it!
Because I think it'll be just more interesting to talk about this one as the weird middle child of the franchise and everything that it entails. It'll be a good chance to talk about everything else in the film in the series. So I want to talk about Home Alone 3.
Why that one?
You'll see. It's an important piece of cinematic history, Steve. You'll understand. We're going to talk about Home Alone 3, the least relevant of all of them.
I can't wait for all of the comments on this one.
Yeah,
so much discussion. So many people clamoring for the YouTube algorithm to tell them about 3.
You want to know what I bet happens, though, Steve?
What?
I will make this bet right now. I'm not saying right away, but I guarantee you this will be the most viewed episode of Geeky Gentleman Holiday Month. Not just this year, I'm gonna go with ever. Because when I do like a weird specific who the fuck even remembers this movie, and I put it on YouTube and I put a thumbnail that very clearly has the Geeky Gentleman logo in the thumbnail, you want to know what happens?
Everyone thinks it's the goddamn movie.
Everyone thinks it's the goddamn movie, and then I get a bunch of comments in different languages, but they're in like internet commenter grammar structure, so none of them translate properly, but there's just like a vague like hatred and anger to all of them because it's not the movie that I've uploaded. So I guarantee you this gets like at least a couple thousand, if not tens of thousands of views. My most viewed video is a review of The Mask with over 1 million views, Steve.
Because it's as long as the movie, it might as
Yep.
Oh my god. I can't wait. Is Home Alone 3 streaming anywhere, or do I have...
I don't fucking know. I mean, like, I assume you could just go, like, to your nearest dumpster and find it in there somewhere.
The world will never know as much Googling up for Home Alone 3 as week is about to have.
I know, right? It's on Disney Plus.
Okay, cool. I can use that. I have that.
Okay. Alright, everyone. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
And I hate myself.
And we are your geeky gentlemen. And we will be discussing things. I really like how we went from like 5 minutes ago. Steve's got like, yeah, I'm happy about everything. I've cured my depression with friends. To, I hate myself because my friend's gonna make me watch Home Alone 3.
Who needs enemies?